Today on Empowering Workplaces, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Serena Huang. Serena is an AI leader, people analytics expert, and former F100 executive who built large-scale AI and analytics systems in companies including PayPal, GE, and Kraft Heinz. She's recognized as a top AI keynote speaker in the US and is known for helping organizations measure what once felt impossible to measure, things like employee well-being, culture, and leadership impact. Dr. Huang is the author of The Inclusion Equation, Leveraging Data and AI for Organizational Diversity and Well-being. Today, she works with organizations on the hard middle of transformation, turning promising tools into systems people actually use, trust, and stand behind. And I'm really looking forward to digging into a shared passion of ours on today's podcast, which is all about creating psychologically safe workplaces. Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, the podcast where we explore how to create more meaningful, fulfilling, and productive work environments. I'm Sanja Licina, an organizational psychologist, and we'll be talking with leaders, experts, and innovators who are shaping the future of work and sharing their stories on how we can all contribute to building a workplace where everyone can thrive. Whether you're an HR professional, a leader, or just someone who cares about making work better, I'm glad you're here. Serena, it is such an honor to have you back. You, in the time that I've known you, you become one of the people, like one of my favorite humans, but also one of the people I admire the most because the passion that you bring into the world, like your amazing aura and also your dedication to your work is just something really to be admired. And I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our friendship, and I'm grateful for all the amazing things you're doing for our community and beyond. And thank you so much for joining us again today. You've been on Empowering Workplaces before. We've done a number of different webinars. You've been a guest at our conference. I feel like anytime that I can have you join us and help share your wisdom and knowledge with the world, it's just an absolute honor. So thank you so much for being with us again today. We have a lot to talk about when it comes to psychological safety, and I can't wait to continue to learn from you on this topic. But before we jump in, I know I gave an introduction, but I feel like sometimes it doesn't even do it justice. There's so much more to you than even just, the words that are shared in your background. So before we jump into all of the questions, I just love for you to tell our listeners that, some that know you, maybe we'll learn something new, and maybe a few of them who are getting to know you for the first time, just to get to know a little bit more about who you are.
Thank you so much for having me, Sanja. It's a pleasure to be back, and everything you just said, I feel the same about you, and I'm grateful for our friendship as well. Okay, so something that you did mention in the intro is I am a recovering data scientist, and my proudest accomplishment is building machine learning algorithms that predicted my own attrition before I knew it. So that was a very fun conversation to have with my CHRO when my name came up in the model. So that is for perhaps another day. But my lessons learned were that sometimes the data could know something that humans don't, and we do have to work together. And that's now very timely with AI being everywhere. So my first chapter in my career, I was leading people analytics teams, and really transitioned into HR technology and AI, and implemented recruiting AI in different companies. And I got to see how important it is to be responsible, to act responsibly. When you're implementing AI that touch people's career, that's people's lives. So if you are interviewing using special software that understand people's knowledge, and there could be potential biases, or the software doesn't understand different types of accents, you could really have excluded a great population of candidates without knowing. So I think about those days a lot, and that's why I decided to translate all of that practical knowledge into a framework of responsible AI in my book, And I would add, on the fun side, I paint for fun. So you can see a little
Yeah.
behind me. It
I
lots
was going to ask if that's one of your masterpieces.
yeah, it's just good to balance your brain, right? There's the data and AI part, and then there's art, and I also make music in my free time. So I sing, I compose, I play the piano. So yeah.
I love that. Now I admire you even more because that's part of my brain that I haven't developed as much. I love painting. So now that you're saying that, maybe next time I'm in Chicago, we'll have to go to one of
Yes.
those. I used to love when I lived there, the paint and glass of wine classes. Oh,
Yes.
amazing.
Paint and sip, I think. Yes.
I think so. We'll have to pencil that in. Singing, maybe not. I don't think you'd enjoy hearing me, but painting, absolutely. Maybe we
Never
can throw
know.
in a yoga class or something.
Oh, I like that. I like that. I'll bring my puppy. It could be a puppy and yoga class.
All right, now we're talking. All right, well, we'll definitely have to make some plans, and we know we'll see each other in the next few months. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think to me, it's always really wonderful for our listeners to get to know our guests a little bit better. And there's so many more dimensions to all of us than necessarily just the topics that we're discussing on the podcast. And to me, that side of humanity and bringing it to life, I think helps the topic resonate even more. So thank you for taking the time and sharing a little bit of the other side of you with us. And I even learned something, and I've known you for years, so that's super cool. All right, so jumping into the topic of psychological safety, I know that that is something that we share a passion on, and to me I become even more I don't know if obsessed is the right word, but really passionate about it in the recent months, just with a lot of changes happening and leaning into it even more to understand what are organizations doing and what can we all be doing better. So what's interesting is that really many companies do say that psychological safety matters, but what we're finding is that very few actually measure it. So from your perspective, what does it look like to measure psychological safety with real data?
Great question. And there are so many dimensions to psychological safety. I think sometimes we think it's black and white, like you either have psychological safety or you don't, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And one of my favorite researchers on the topic, Timothy Clark, has this 4 dimensions or 4 steps rather of psychological safety. And the first step is to be included. So, so to be included means, you can think about whether or not you are invited to a meeting, right? And sometimes inclusion can feel like pie in the sky where it's hard to measure. But think about it. We all have felt excluded at one point in our life, whether it's a party we didn't get invited to as a child or an important meeting we didn't get invited to at work. And so we can easily explain the times when we felt excluded. So it is not impossible at all to measure the level of inclusion. So that's level 1. And then the next is to feel safe enough to learn. And how do we learn? Well, a lot of times we learn by asking questions, right? So if you're explaining something, let's say a teacher is explaining something and none of the students are asking questions. Why is that? Well, they're probably afraid that if they ask, they might come across as not as smart, or, there might be consequences for whatever reason. So is it safe enough to ask? So you can think about analysis, different type of measurement of things like, do we know if people are asking questions in meetings, right? There's now AI on top of different platforms that analyze how people are showing up in meetings. So you observe questions from employees, during all hands, town halls, are questions actually asked? And if not, maybe it's time to pause. So that's like kind of the second level. And then you go up one more step. It is safe to contribute. So I'm asking a question and then you explain back to me. Great, we're done. But what if I maybe don't necessarily agree and I have a different opinion? Do I feel safe to speak up and contribute to the conversation? Especially when there's a difference in power, especially as more senior than me, do I feel safe enough to contribute, even though maybe this is actually my domain? Maybe I am the expert, but I'm very junior, or I'm new in this organization, or I look very different from everyone else, and I don't feel safe to speak up. So do we feel safe enough to contribute? And a lot of times you can measure these things with like 360 surveys, beyond engagement surveys, of course, and ask how people perceive their leaders. Do they actually, feel like they can contribute to meetings or big topics or an initiative and share different opinions? Yeah. And then last but not least, the level 4 is safe to challenge the status quo, the hardest one. So, we say the most expensive 7 words in business is "this is how we've always done it." And if that's the case, do I feel safe enough to say, I know this is how we've always done it. However, what do you think about X? And be okay with being different, be okay expressing something different. And that's really hard, right? Especially for newer employees, for junior employees, for people who are from marginalized groups, that can be challenging. So those are kind of different levels of psychological safety. And I share a bit on how data and potentially AI can play a role and help you measure that. Because we think about engagement surveys a lot as a vehicle to measure and agree, but it's not enough, especially today. You have so many other signals that can tell you what is really going on inside your organization.
Yeah, well, thank you and there's so many. I'll just reiterate or highlight a few points. There's, everything from being invited all the way to challenging the status quo. 2 things I'll just quickly highlight before I move to the next question is, one, I love that in addition to employee surveys, you mentioned the 360, because a lot of times, like, leaders have such disproportionate impact on how safe people feel to raise different concerns. Yes. And they're often not aware that they're maybe the roadblock. And so actually seeing that and hearing that from people can be really eye-opening, because what I've seen in a lot of our work is that it's not necessarily that people don't want to have a psychologically safe place or they don't want their employees to speak up, but they don't realize they're prohibiting it until you see it on paper and you say, wow, I didn't realize that that's how it was coming across. So let me see how I can change that. So wanted to quickly double down on that point. And also where you were saying, and hopefully, these are not famous last words and I'm not too naive, but, saying we've always done it that way. I think the one good thing that's happening with all of the AI is fewer organizations can actually say that out loud, because there are few things where you can say we've always done it that way that people are going to be okay with, because at the very least they would say, oh, but can't you do, can AI do that?
Exactly.
Can't you do a little twin, or can we have an agent? So hopefully like that mentality will shake things up a little bit. But as you were saying that, I was like, oh goodness, like I know that saying all too well. But maybe I'm slightly hopeful in all these like upcoming shifts that will leave our vocabulary a little bit.
Absolutely. So, yes. And I would add, one of the ways I've used AI, speaking of AI in meetings, is to analyze the power dynamics in a meeting. So, we now have lots of meetings that are recorded and comes with a transcript, right? And of course, you have to get permission, make sure everyone's okay with the recording. But you can just take the transcript and ask AI to analyze the power dynamics. And you can say things like, analyze the hidden power dynamics in this meeting transcript, not based on the job titles, but based on what's actually said, whose idea gain traction, who gets talked over. And then you can, follow up with, my name is X, Y, and Z. Tell me, how did I show up? What was my tone and style? And how can I increase my influence? This is super fun. So I encourage you to try on a recent meeting and keep me posted on what you find.
Oh, I'll definitely have to do that because a lot of my meetings are recorded since we have members or online since we have members in all different parts of the world.
Right,
And I do sometimes have fears that I can be dominating again, best
right,
interest at heart, but a little bit of the personality rub. So I would love to see what recommendations AI would
yes.
have, and also if I'm impacting psychological safety or if I'm just, maybe annoying people with my too much passion. I'll be back to you on that one.
Very much about that.
No. So keeping up with the AI topic, one of the things that I was wondering, like, because it's something I'm curious about, and I really want to really urgently learn more, is most organizations are talking about AI adoption, and there's really rapid change. Do you see psychological safety as something that's relatively stable in organizations? Or could it change quickly with these kinds of like new, I don't even want to know, like, or I don't know if I would call it an initiative or just really like these huge monumental changes in organizations. But for people who have measured psychological safety or maybe feel like they've established it in their organization through whatever measures they are, how frequently do they need to do those check-ins to make sure that something like hasn't rapidly changed because of a communication or an expectation or
Yeah,
something similar?
right. Definitely, AI has changed a lot of how organizations are approaching change because it's so
Yeah.
rapid. And these days, I actually work with communications teams really closely to make sure the principles of transparency is there, especially when it comes to AI, because psychological safety can quickly drop overnight when you have a change that is not communicated clearly. So I'll share an example. I was brought into an organization where they had a pilot on AI that went really well. And then when they scaled, they were curious, usage actually dropped. We don't know what's going on. And so I did a very human thing called talking to people. And and so instead of rolling out more surveys, I talked to individuals and asked what's going on, and quickly realized it was actually during the pilot. So the pilot was not communicated clearly in terms of how people were selected to be part of it. So, they did their normal thing of talking to managers. Every VP got to nominate X number of people to be part of this AI pilot. And then they get to choose, right? Because they're empowered to choose who comes to this part of this 3 months pilot. And immediately, because of the external environment, rumors started to fly overnight that if you're on the list of pilot, your job is safe. And if you are not, then you should brush up your interview skills because you are obviously not important. And none of that was part of the selection process, obviously, but because of fear, because of lack of psychological safety, people make assumptions. Like we always fill in the blanks, right? When when the story is not clear, we fill in the blanks, and we go to negative, because of negativity bias, we go to worst case scenarios, and that wasn't the case at all. So by the time they roll out to everyone, there were people who are actively resisting adoption because they knew this was going to impact my job, or they thought. Again, none of this was clearly communicated that AI is going to take your job or anything like that. But people started to believe what they hear and the stories around them. And so I think psychological safety, I wouldn't say I have a magic frequency, but I do think you have to measure it probably before and after big initiatives like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a new AI tool that's being rolled out, or a pilot, even if it's within a small function like customer service, maybe adopting first or something like that, check in to see how people are feeling and whether or not there's a difference after the rollout, and then check in again after. So I really advocate for, after the big communications, get some feedback. If you can't right there within your town hall and your announcement, right, get live feedback. A lot of organizations are not super comfortable with it, right? Because, who knows? Do we want everyone to see how people are doing? Like life polls may be a little scary, but you can do live surveys that are then anonymized and then present that to leadership to see how is my message really landing with the employees, because you just don't know. And so, check in and see what's happening compared to maybe last year. Try to use the same questions so you can do your trending analysis. And I think the other piece is the qualitative feedback, right? That's important. Sometimes we don't have enough context around why is psychological safety measures lower than before. Like give people a chance to explain what's going on this year. And this is one of the tricky items on the survey. You can't exactly go up to someone and ask, or in the survey, do you feel psychologically safe? Right? That would be a terrible question. But there are other dimensions, right? Again, whether it's feeling included, contribute, learn, that we talked about, challenging status quo. You can think about those dimensions, or you can think about, other metrics that matter to you that are tied to psychological safety and see how it's changing. But then also ask, what's contributing to that score, or can you want to add, and give you a little bit more context around that. Because of AI, we can now analyze text so much more quickly. There's a reason why we don't gather that feedback.
Yeah. Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that really resonated too is one, the clarity of the communication. And also that no organization is working in a silo, meaning that there are things happening externally in our environment that are going to impact people. And oftentimes, one of the first things we feel is fear, right?
Yes.
Even if there could be excitement, even if there's a lot of upside, like generally the first thing is what is going to happen to me? What is going to happen to my job? Am I still valued in this organization? And so for organizations to realize that even if they feel like they're doing everything right internally, that there are all of these external factors still making an impact that they need to be aware of. And really the only way they're going to know what the different people are thinking is to ask, because to be aware of all the different scenarios that could be going through somebody's head is impossible without that conversation. Because I know, to me, as inquisitive a person as I am, and as many surveys as I do and conversations I have, I always find information that's not only like, oh, I haven't thought about that, but it's like, what? Like, I have not thought, you know what I mean? Like, it's something really big. And a lot of times it really makes all the sense in the world. And I come back, I'm like, I can't believe I didn't think about that. But the truth is I didn't. And all of my scenarios and all of the iterations, like I always learn from other people's inputs about what's going on with them much better than before I asked. And so for companies to keep thinking about that it's, having those conversations is so critical, because without it, it's really impossible for us to put ourselves in other people's shoes, because we don't know their reality.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that you talked about earlier that actually I love this story and I didn't know about it, you predicting your own attrition. That must have been an interesting conversation with your leader. Like, wait, I must have messed up that algorithm. Like, I don't know what's going on here. So in people analytics, we often are asked to look at turnover, analyze turnover, or similar lagging indicators. Now, I know a lot of organizations are, starting to think about how can we get ahead of different things? How can we actually not look at lagging, but how can we understand what's going on before some, big event happens or something goes awry? So what would you say are the signals that psychological safety may be eroding before people actually start quitting? What could organizations be looking out for?
Yeah, there are lots of signals. If you think about your own journey in your career and when you change jobs, and just ask yourself, how many months did it take for you to get to the point of wanting to quit? Because turnover it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, I will call it, right? It's not just the one thing that makes you want to quit instantly. It is multiple things. So there are lots of signals that happen beforehand. Certainly, psychological safety could, assuming you're measuring that, and if you're not, definitely encourage you to think about doing that on a regular basis. But one of the signals that you can easily even see without surveys is, do your loud and vocal and passionate people go quiet? Do they no longer show up to meetings and be present in the same ways that they did before? Did the people who used to challenge status quos no longer speak up? Did the people who used to ask lots of questions go quiet? And why? And what does that mean? So I think that's a signal that you can notice pretty quickly if you have a team, that is not thousands and thousands in size. You can notice as a leader of that organization what's happening in regular meetings. But certainly there are other signals as well. And I think the most interesting predictor I found that's a little surprising to me is not necessarily people who are engaged become disengaged. Sure, that's not interesting. We know that makes sense. But it's actually just in general, any change in behavior is a really good predictor that something is going on. We've seen people who, may used to be kind of, maybe not always on time at work, and they might be a little bit late, just a few minutes, and suddenly they're on time. Right? And you're thinking, oh, this is a great sign. They're engaged. But it's actually them showing up to make sure they get a great performance review. They already have a job offer in hand. They just want to get the full bonus. And so they're showing up differently. Before, they were kind of resisting, they didn't really want to be there. So they're kind of late, not enough to be noticeable, but we can see the badge swipes, right? And suddenly, wow, this great employee is quitting. What's going on? And the other signal I've seen is people who might be taking more training courses. Your LMS activity could be very telling. We don't think about that, but when someone goes from being late on compliance trainings and you have to nudge them so that they finish, they suddenly are taking, I don't know, Python, AI, what have you, that has nothing to do with their current job. What's happening? Well, maybe they're getting ready for the next job. They want to show up as a great employee on day one. So all these are potential signals of change in behavior as a result of change in their life that you just have no idea about.
Wow, that is wild. I have so many thoughts. I'm going to keep them to myself to not get us off track. But it is really surprising to me. As you were talking through it, it makes a lot of sense. But to your point, it's certainly something we're like, oh, phew, finally, Sanja's taking all the training courses we've been asking her to take over the last 10 years. It's like, actually, you might want to talk to Sanja. There may be something else going on. So that's a really great insight that, I would have absolutely overlooked as a leader and, somebody even that's been in people analytics for a while. So one of the things you mentioned that was swiping the card, know when people clock in, know when people clock out. So we have more data than we ever have before. Well-being, maybe not better well-being than we ever have before, but how? So now a lot of organizations, not a lot, not as many as I'd like, but there are organizations out there, maybe an increasing number, that do pay attention to employee well-being and want to increase it. We have more data than we've had available before. But how do you strike that balance between wanting to take as much data as possible to help employees with their well-being, but then also not have it feel like Big Brother-ish? I don't want, if I log in, 30 minutes later and my Slack goes off or my email, is my manager happy because maybe I worked out in the morning, or are they watching me because I'm late? What can organizations do with this information to actually turn it for the good of the employees and help increase that well-being, but not have that fear of every single move of mine is now being watched to help
Right.
my well-being, not get that perception.
Yes. Yeah, it's a really hard balance. I go back to the responsible AI principles I have. The first one is do no harm. And I think as an organization, you have to ask yourself, what are our principles when it comes to measuring something potentially super sensitive and personal? What are our principles when it comes to using AI in this particular field? And then transparency is another one, and explainability. So if we focus on those three, let's call it most important, especially when it comes to well-being. Can I make sure that I'm not harming any employees in this process of measuring, monitoring? Is it really truly for the greater good? And am I being transparent about what I'm measuring? Who can see what? At what point? What is the purpose? And I think those are not easy, because sometimes I've heard leaders even say, well, just let's collect the data and then we'll figure out the insights. And then if something is interesting and useful, we will communicate. Well, no, it's too late. You have to communicate at the time, preferably before the time of collection of the data, and then be able to explain it. If AI is part of it, is it explainable? What kind of analytics is happening behind the scenes? And I think if we can cover those three, we're in a good place. But I was with a consulting firm many years ago. I remember Fitbit, and they were giving out Fitbit as part of an initiative. So it was free Fitbit, but you have to log in with your email associated with work. So, like the data person in me was thinking, what data are you getting from me?
Yeah.
And I wasn't really getting a ton of response. So I went back and I read the thing that I signed, right? This giant document that had all the disclaimers. And it was basically like, yes, your data will be anonymized, but the company will be looking at this data to figure out how to, well, eventually optimize and lower healthcare costs. Okay, understand, right? So then, I think about, okay, so all these other incentives I get, like the free gym and subsidies, that's all tied to lowering healthcare costs. And then I hopefully get to decide, do I want to participate in that? Do I have the autonomy to opt out? Autonomy is another principle that's really important and part of the framework. Do I get to choose not using this Fitbit? Or would that actually be frowned upon because everyone else is using it, right? So I think there's a lot of that. And this is not new, right? The wearables have been around for a long time. And some companies have subsidized and used the data, hopefully, for good. I don't know if you remember the example in my book about PwC UK. Yeah, right before 2020, right before COVID, they had this hunch that some consultants are traveling a lot and it's impacting their sleep, or they're in too many meetings, it's impacting their sleep, and therefore they're not as productive and healthy as they could be. So they have people opt in to wear these wearables for a short period of time. And so it was purely opt-in. You were not given and tricked into doing this. And right, they quickly found, not surprising, again, like for 2019, this is pretty advanced. They found that back-to-back meetings are detrimental to sleep and productivity and stress. And then they did a follow-up shortly after pandemic, where travel started to resume and a little bit, but then people are still mostly indoors and lots of meetings. And to see, is there a difference between the group, the same group before and after? So again, like, this is not super new, but it seems very innovative because it seems like, wow, how can I possibly get employees to sign up for this level of monitoring? But I think it largely depends on how you're going to use the data, and what do you tell them about their data, their privacy, and where AI plays a role.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were saying, "Oh, I want to collect a bunch of your data so I can lower my healthcare costs," it's like, I mean, sure, if it's a win-win, like you
Right,
guide me to having better health, like I would gladly not have to go to the doctor. But
right.
what if something happened? Like, but then what if I have an accident? Now I'm penalized because I was, sleeping 8 hours a night and drinking my water and going to the gym every day. But now I can't get that care. It's a little bit of a hold on. I
Yes.
need to see this fine print. But
Hmm.
no, it's fascinating. I think the more we know about the human dynamics and the, in the PwC example, there's a lot of ways that organizations and people can use it for good. It's just that transparency to your point of I'm giving you a lot of information about myself and I want to be clear, like, is this going to backfire or what are you trying to
Right.
do with it before I sign my name and I give my soul away. So if you're listening, if you're creating the fine print, be thoughtful about the fine print. And if you're getting fine print, make sure to read it. I would
Absolutely.
say those are two of our takeaways. So going back to AI, because I know it is so much on everybody's minds today, whether you're in charge of implementing it, whether you're a user of it, I think most people want to figure out how it can benefit them even beyond the fear, because it's one of those like, hey, it's the train, you either get on it and, maybe influence the ride or, you're going to be left behind. Like, I think that's the reality we live in today. What role do you think psychological safety plays in whether employees actually really adopt AI, or they're maybe quietly avoiding it, maybe not loudly, but still quietly? Because I could see AI adoption is certainly top of mind for pretty much every organization. So
Right.
I just want to make sure that the leadership teams are clear for how psychological safety impacts that it's not something that necessarily lives in, one lives in isolation from the other.
Right, right. Absolutely. And if you think about the pilot story I shared, right, that's exactly why some people may choose not to adopt AI because of fear. And so you can ask yourself in the AI rollout, are people asking questions? Are they eager to learn? And are they contributing new ideas? Are they challenging what you're rolling out? So, for example, most companies can afford, whether it's time or money, to roll out multiple of the same, similar AI platforms, right? Very rarely would you see a company that has ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude all at the same time. But we have preferences oftentimes. If we have dabbled in AI, we might prefer one over the other. Are people sharing those thoughts? Are people challenging and say, why did you go with this company as opposed to this other one? Now that we know some of these companies have been in the headlines and lawsuits are happening, people have very strong opinions, right? Even about AI platforms. So are those opinions showing up anywhere that you can hear and see? And how are you addressing them? So it can definitely play a role. And the other piece that everyone is thinking, but maybe not saying out loud, is how is this going to impact my career? What does that mean for me? Where do I need to upskill? Are you giving me the resources? And is my road to promotion the same as before? Or is that road basically dead now? What does that mean? And I do this survey, this quote unquote survey of my live audience when I go to all the conferences I do, and I ask them, raise your hand if your manager has talked to you about how AI is going to impact your career. You've had those conversations, raise your hand. And I stand in front of an average of 30,000 people per year. And about 2% of the hands will go up, 2%. And then I will go up to those people afterwards and I will ask them, so what is your role? Most often they're in the C-suite. So
Wow.
the chief transformation officer, the chief HR officer, and the chief technology officer. Like, great. So the CEO is having those conversations. But what about everyone else? occasionally you have people who are brought in to do a transformation project, and they're very clear on, after this is over, I need to move on to a new role. But outside of that, no one's having these candid conversations. So I started asking more people, why don't we talk about this? And the managers and leaders, VPs, directors, they will tell me, because I don't even know what's going to happen to my job.
Wow.
And I can't provide the clarity, and I don't want to provide a false sense of comfort. So I just rather not talk about it. And I'm also waiting for my boss to tell me what's going to happen if I'm going to have a job. So I think that's a signal of we need to talk about it more. And maybe there's not enough psychological safety for these leaders, managers, to ask the tough questions of, hey, how are you thinking about the future pipeline, the succession planning? Are we going to have the same paths as before, or should we be doing something differently today? And, we talk about workforce planning so much, but that takes on a different meaning today, because all the roles, many roles need to be redesigned completely, and the structure need to change. But we just hear sort of this, go upskill yourself, or here are some courses. But that's just not enough. I think we need to do both. We need to upskill, but we need to have the tough questions, conversations, even if the answer is, I don't know yet, but we're working on it.
Wow, and that's really eye-opening to me. And first, when you said 2%, for those of you not watching us on video, my jaw just dropped, because I knew it wasn't going to be 100, but 2 is just a dismal percentage. When you started to explain it, it made a little more sense, because you're right, organizations are running so quickly that most people don't know what's going to happen. Maybe a lot of leadership doesn't, but they don't know how many people they might lay off in the next 4 months, 6 months, whatever that is. And so you don't want to give people false hope. You also don't want to, of course, falsely panic them. But the question I wanted to ask you, and now I feel like it's even more complicated, what the answer might be, is if these managers are not feeling psychologically safe to ask or even open up the discussion to see what are the knowns and what are the unknowns. One of the things that we know through research is how huge of an impact managers have on their team's mental health. It is why, and to me, I think it's a little scary, because we put so many expectations on managers, I think, and increasingly more every day. And I don't think organizations always give them the right tools to be successful, but maybe that's for a completely other conversation, as a whole. But when it comes to psychological safety, given the world, especially that we live in today, what could managers be doing? Now, also understanding, to your just earlier point, that they probably don't have all the answers, especially when it comes to AI. But what are some of the things that they could be doing in the current reality to create psychological safety for their teams that maybe it lives outside of AI, but still people feel like they can ask the questions and people feel like they can speak up, etc.?
Yeah, indeed. Managers have a really special job, and of course, with power comes responsibility. And for managers who want to do something, I encourage them to think about, how can I be candid and kind? What will be candid and kind, right? So if I don't know what's going to happen to my job and my entire organization, can I be honest to some extent about that without causing panic? And there's a right way to deliver that message. There's obviously wrong ways to deliver that message, but knowing that people are going to ask. And I think even if people don't speak up in a meeting and ask, are we going to lose our jobs in the open, right? Oftentimes, in my experience leading teams, you may get that ping on Teams or Slack or text, and say, hey, you may not be able to tell me this, but I'm really worried because I have a mortgage and I have little kids. Can you just tell me, wink, wink, if I need to go search for another job, please? And when those messages start to come in, it's time to address them. whether it's through one-on-ones or through a bigger conversation as a team, and just get things out in the open. Or if it feels like it's already too scary, you can certainly hire external consultants to be the unbiased party to gather that feedback in a confidential focus group. So all of that is possible. And then I would encourage them to also have the courage to ask their boss about that. If you really don't have the clarity, ask about it. And even, even thinking about upskilling, what does that mean? If we're just rolling out, free courses, go take it, what happens? Are we rewarding people differently? If I'm upskilling myself, do I, not necessarily expect a bonus, but does that mean something for my future? And I think those questions people are starting to ask kind of quietly, sometimes loudly, depending on the person. And we have to pay attention to those and address them, and have the courage to be candid and but still be kind, because at the end of the day, we need more kindness in this world, and we can always practice that, because as managers, we hold people's mental health in our hands, and it matters what we say.
Yeah. So unfortunately, there's no necessarily silver bullet or an easy answer, but the open communication, listening to input, to your point with kindness, it's not easy. It's not easy being in that spot. And I think if we're waiting for it to be easy, it's never going to arrive. But it's so important that understanding what's happening with your team and communicating what you can whenever you can is really important.
Yeah. And I would also say something super actionable and easy is to set examples on how you are personally experimenting with AI, because innovation, right? Innovation takes experimentation, and experimentation means sometimes you succeed and sometimes you fail or you make a mistake. And if you're just sharing, hey, I know a lot of us feel anxious about being behind, so this is how I'm upskilling myself, and so I built this app over the weekend, try vibe coding, and gosh, it didn't work out at all, and here are the errors I couldn't debug, completely lost. Has anyone tried that, right? Maybe carve out 10 minutes on your team meeting on a regular basis to talk about AI, to talk about how you're learning, to celebrate experimentation, even if it means you made a mistake or you have failed on a small scale, so that you can succeed on a larger scale.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Giving examples of what you're doing, and especially when things don't go as planned. I think we all need some of that. We all need to know we're not the only ones. At least I know in my life that always helps me. So as we wrap up, I have one final question for you. Looking ahead, how might AI and people analytics change how organizations understand psychological safety and well-being?
Yes. AI has made the analysis part of people analytics, the analysis of data, so much faster and so much easier. I think it's taken away the reason for not gathering data completely. Right, back in the day where people say, oh my gosh, there's so much survey data, it would take me days or weeks to analyze and come up with themes, and whether it's quantitative or qualitative. Now that is not true anymore, right? Any platform has those capabilities to help you analyze the comments and data pretty instantly. So I think that's one. And as far as people analytics, there are so many more people analytics professionals in organizations now compared to when I first started. I was building a team of like one or two or three, and it's like, oh my God, it's three of us. It's a group. And now organizations are investing in this area, and I think there's a chance for people analytics professionals themselves to also embrace AI more, and push the boundaries. I know one of the reasons many people analytics leaders told me they can't use AI is because of privacy, right? The data is too sensitive. But if that's how we've always done it, we're not going to make progress.
Yeah.
So how can you challenge your CHRO, your CTO, your friend in legal to think about it differently, so you can get not the data but the insights into the hands of managers who can act on them much faster. And there's, that includes psychological safety, that includes other metrics as well. Yeah. It's not about democratizing data and getting into people's hands. It's about the insights that can be acted upon, so that we can make a difference as leaders, as managers, as practitioners of people analytics.
Thank you. Well, that leaves me very hopeful for the future of people analytics and AI and the way it can work together. Serena, thank you so much. It is incredible how much I learned from you today. I feel like I'm an expert-ish on psychological safety. I've certainly read a lot about it and researched a lot about it. But it is unbelievable how much I learned from you today. So thank you so much. Thank you for your very thoughtful advice, your practical advice, all of your different stories, always opening up yourself and being vulnerable and sharing all the good and all the learnings. I think that's one of the things among many that I really, really appreciate about you. So thank you so much for your time today. For those who are maybe coming across you the first time and are saying, which I'm sure they are, she's brilliant and I need to know more and I want to get in touch with her, or I want to follow her work. What's the best way to keep up with what you're doing, or what's the best way to get a hold of you if somebody maybe has a project that they think you could help them with?
Yeah, my website is datawithserena.com. I also have a YouTube channel, same name, and you can, of course, find me on LinkedIn. So I do a lot of content creation on various topics, including AI. Sometimes you'll see a picture of my puppy. And I hope to stay connected. And I know I will learn so much from my audience as well. So do stay in touch, please.
Yes, and I can attest as one of Serena's biggest fans and followers that she does have really, really amazing content. So hopefully you have a project in mind that you can collaborate with her on, but even if not, do follow her so she stays top of mind when the time is right. Serena, thank you so much again. You're the absolute best. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining and for your time again. And we'll see you all again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for having me.